There are many different reasons why people want to move to Alaska. Some people are not happy with their lives where they currently live. Some people want to find themselves. Some people want to get away from toxic friends or family. Some people have problems they want to leave behind. If you're one of those people, my advice would be don't move to Alaska. Being happy has to do with happiness inside of you, not where you live. If you can't find yourself in Idaho or Colorado, you're not going to find yourself in Alaska. You don't have to move across the country to stop communicating with people you find toxic. And whatever problems you have where you are now, don't get covered in snow and disappear when you arrive in Alaska. Problems follow people anywhere they go until those problems are resolved. I was very happy where I was living before I moved to Alaska, but I wanted to live somewhere that had more snow, more wildlife, and where I could live in a smaller community in a cabin. There were many places I could have chosen to move to, so I put them all into a list in 2012. Montana, Colorado, northern Minnesota, northern Wyoming, Alaska, just to name a few. Over the next 3 years, I researched small towns in several states that offered what I was looking for. One by one, I removed states from that list until I was left with only two, Minnesota and Alaska. I knew that northern Minnesota would be easier and cheaper to move to, but in 2017, I realized if I go to northern Minnesota, I would have such a small area to find somewhere I really liked. If I went to Alaska, there was much more of everything I wanted across the entire state, and I would have many, many more towns and communities to choose from for my next home. So that's why I chose Alaska. I wanted to move right away, but it was also hard for me to leave the town I was living in. I had three older cats that didn't need to be put through the stress of such a big move, so I decided I would go to Alaska after they all passed away. 6 years later, at the age of 20, my last remaining cat died. Not only was I lucky that my cat lived 5 years longer than the average age of a house cat, but it also gave me a lot of time to prepare for Alaska and to save more money before I moved there. My friends often told me, you know way too much about Alaska for someone who doesn't live there. They were right. It was weird. I'm going to blame my cat for that. There were a few things I did that turned out to be beneficial for me while waiting over the years to move to Alaska, and I'm going to talk about them here. Then I'll tell you what my plans were upon arriving at Alaska and what worked out for me and what didn't. I would suggest to anyone to consider taking these steps or doing something similar to what I did if you want to move to Alaska, because it will make your move and transaction go much more smoothly than just jumping on a plane with bad plans, wrong information, and unrealistic hopes. Over several years while doing my research in Google and watching some YouTube videos, I wrote a list of every town and community in Alaska that I felt may be the type of place I'm looking forward to living in. I wrote down how many people live in each town, what the average snowfall every winter for each town was, what the winter and summer temperature averages were for each town, what type of stores were in each town, as well as how far the closest grocery store was from each town. I also made a note on how far each town was from areas of Alaska that I may need to go to get necessities that may not be in the town I chose to live in. When this list was complete, I had about 20 towns and communities on the list, and the majority of them were on mainland Alaska, which is why I chose to come to this part of Alaska. I also knew that I wanted to spend my first winter in the snowiest city in the US, Valdez. The next step that I took was to figure out whether I would be arriving by plane to Anchorage or Fairbanks. I chose Fairbanks because in doing so, I would be able to drive in one direction and hit most of the towns on my list during a short road trip on my way to Valdez for the winter. The third step that I took was I searched online for every motel, hotel, and lodge in Valdez. I sent them all an email telling them that I would be arriving in early October and asked if any of them allowed long-term tenants over the winter. I didn't have much luck as most of the motels told me that they were closed during the winter, while others didn't reply back to me. I didn't receive a single positive answer from anyone. Although that was not going to cause me to change my original plan of spending my first winter in Valdez, it did make me realize that that may not happen, and I needed a couple of backup plans to make sure I could at least stay in one of my other preferred towns if Valdez did not work out for me. So my fourth step was I started emailing every motel, hotel, and lodge in my list of towns until I found one place in two of the towns that said that they have available rooms and that I could stay 7 or 8 months over the winter. Now I was all set to make my move without any concerns or worries that I would not have a place to stay if I couldn't find something in Valdez. I decided to fly into Fairbanks, rent a car, and drive to Valdez, allowing me to visit most of the towns on my list to see if I liked them in person. This was important for me because I needed to see the towns and communities to decide which one I was going to move to after the winter. By the time I reached Valdez, I had cut my list of 20 towns down to 5 towns. When I arrived in Valdez, I had 2 days to find a place to stay for the winter, and things went better than expected. I found the motel to stay in for the entire winter in less than 2 hours. I couldn't believe how easy it was, but I was happy everything worked out the way I had hoped. The funny thing was, this was one of the motels that did not reply to my email months earlier. So if you want to move to Alaska, do what I did. It will make things so much easier for you and will allow you to enjoy your arrival without unnecessary stress. But there is one more extremely important bit of advice I have for you to make sure everything works as smoothly for you as it did for me. Move to Alaska in October or November. Although most of the hotels and lodges will be closed, a few of them stay open year-round, and during the winter their prices drop up to 90% from their summer prices. I found one hotel that charged $399 per night during the summer for only $42 per night during the winter. I also found lodges that charged $179 per night during the summer for only $33 per night during the winter. Some of you may be asking, why didn't I just rent an apartment instead of staying in a lodge or motel? And the answer is simple. Not only is it cheaper to stay in a lodge or motel during the winter in Alaska, but it's also much easier to find a motel or lodge that has an available room in the winter than it is to find an available apartment. Before you do what I did, make sure you have enough money to pay for several months of your rent and food while you look for a job in case you don't find work as quickly as you hope to. Don't just go to Alaska with $100 in your pocket. Valdez, for example, is a perfect place to start your first winter in Alaska because you don't need a car if you live there, which saves money, and there are jobs available in Valdez throughout the winter. I can't say the same for every small town that you may be interested in spending your first winter in Alaska. It just depends on where you want to go to. During my time in Valdez over the winter, I chose the town I wanted to move to in the following summer. In April, I drove to Anchorage and stayed there while I searched for a cabin in the interior. It took some time, but after 2.5 months, I'm getting ready to leave Anchorage and move to my new hometown.